Most people assume that if something goes wrong, if there's a crisis, a disruption, a sudden emergency, they'll have time to react, time to think, time to prepare, time to fill up their car, grab supplies, and figure things out. But history shows something very different. When a real disruption hits, especially one that affects fuel supply, the window to act isn't days, it's hours, roughly 6 of them. That number isn't random. It comes from a pattern that has repeated itself over and over again, across different countries, different crises, and different types of disruptions. Whether it's a cyber attack, a pipeline shutdown, a natural disaster, or even just a rumor spreading online, fuel systems don't fail slowly. They collapse fast, and once that collapse begins, it accelerates in a way most people are completely unprepared for. To understand why, you have to look at how fuel actually moves. Most people imagine gas stations as storage points, places where fuel sits, waiting to be used. But in reality, they're more like endpoints in a continuous flow system. Fuel is constantly being delivered, constantly being consumed. The tanks underground don't hold weeks of supply. In many cases, they hold just a few days' worth under normal conditions. And normal is the key word. Because the moment demand spikes, even slightly, that balance breaks. One of the clearest examples of this happened during the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. When the pipeline, which supplies nearly half of the fuel for the US East Coast, was shut down, there wasn't an immediate nationwide shortage. The system didn't run out of fuel overnight. But something else happened first. Something more dangerous. People panicked. Within hours of the news spreading, drivers began lining up at gas stations. Not because they needed fuel immediately, but because they were afraid they wouldn't be able to get it later. That behavior alone was enough to overwhelm the system. Gas stations that would normally serve a steady flow of customers suddenly faced demand 2, 3, even 5 times higher than usual. And they weren't built for that. Trucks couldn't deliver fuel fast enough to keep up. Stations ran dry. Not because the country was out of fuel, but because the distribution system couldn't handle the surge. In some areas, over 70% of gas stations were out of supply within days. But the critical phase, the point where things shifted from normal to unstable, happened much faster. It happened in hours. The first 6 hours after the news broke were when the lines formed, when people who were paying attention moved early. After that, it became a waiting game. Long lines, empty pumps, and uncertainty. This pattern isn't limited to cyber attacks. It shows up in natural disasters too. Before hurricanes, for example, fuel demand spikes dramatically. As evacuation orders are issued, people rush to fill their tanks. In states like Florida or Louisiana, it's common to see gas stations running dry 24 to 48 hours before a storm even makes landfall. But again, the real shift happens earlier, the moment people decide to act. Because once that decision spreads through a population, it creates a feedback loop. You see a line at a gas station, so you assume something is wrong. That assumption makes you join the line, and your presence makes the line longer, reinforcing the perception of scarcity. This is how a stable system becomes unstable, not because of actual shortage, but because of perceived shortage. And perception moves faster than supply. Another example is the UK fuel crisis. There was no fundamental lack of fuel in the country. The issue was a shortage of truck drivers to deliver it. But once the media reported potential disruptions, panic buying began almost immediately. Within a matter of days, stations across the UK were empty. Not because there wasn't fuel, but because it couldn't be delivered quickly enough to match the sudden surge in demand. Again, the critical window wasn't days. It was the first few hours after the story broke. This is why 6 hours matters. It's not a precise countdown. It's a behavioral window, the period between when information becomes public and when the majority of people react to it. Early movers act within that window. Everyone else follows, and by then, the system is already under stress. So what actually happens during those 6 hours? At first, it's quiet. A small number of people, those who are paying attention to news, alerts, or social media, start to act. They fill their tanks, maybe grab a few extra supplies. There's no visible panic yet. Gas stations are still operating normally. Then comes the second phase. Word spreads. More people start to hear about the issue. Maybe they see a post online. Maybe a friend mentions it. Maybe a news alert pops up. Demand begins to increase, but it's still manageable. And then, almost suddenly, it tips. Lines start forming. Stations begin to run out of certain fuel grades. Social media is filled with images of empty pumps and crowded forecourts. At this point, the system is no longer stable. Even people who weren't initially concerned begin to react, not because they believe there's a shortage, but because they see others reacting. This is the moment the window closes. After that, it's no longer about preparation, it's about competition. And competition in this context means scarcity, because fuel systems are designed for efficiency, not surge capacity. They work perfectly under predictable demand, but they don't have the flexibility to handle sudden spikes. There's no hidden reserve that can be released instantly. Deliveries take time. Infrastructure has limits. So once the system is overwhelmed, it doesn't recover quickly. This is why understanding the timeline matters more than understanding the event itself. It's not just about what happens, it's about when you respond. And this extends beyond fuel. The same pattern appears in grocery stores, supply chains, even financial systems. The early phase is always calm. The middle phase is chaotic. The late phase is constrained. Fuel just happens to be one of the most visible examples, because it's something people rely on every day. Now, this doesn't mean every disruption will lead to shortages. Many events resolve quickly. Supply chains adjust, deliveries catch up. But the initial reaction, the surge in demand, happens almost every time. And that's the part you can't ignore. Because if you wait until the problem is obvious, you're already behind. The people who get caught in long lines, who struggle to find fuel, who are forced to ration, they're not necessarily unprepared. They just reacted too late. They entered the system after it had already shifted from stable to unstable. And once that shift happens, individual actions have less impact. You're no longer deciding when to fill up. You're waiting for an opportunity to do it. So what's the takeaway? It's not about panic. It's not about hoarding. It's about awareness. Understanding that modern systems, especially fuel, are fragile under pressure. That they rely on timing as much as supply. And that in the early moments of a disruption, small decisions have outsized consequences. Because in a world where everything moves fast, information, reactions, behavior, the difference between being early and being late isn't days, it's hours, about 6 of them. Once that initial group begins acting, the second signal appears. Localized demand spikes. You might not see it in the news yet, but you'll notice subtle changes. A slightly longer line at a gas station, a station that's out of premium fuel, a delivery truck arrived earlier than usual. These are early stress indicators, small imbalances that suggest demand is starting to outpace supply. At this stage, the system is still functioning, but it's no longer balanced. And then comes the third signal, the one most people actually notice. Visibility, photos, videos, social media posts, a tweet showing a line of cars, a video of a station with bags over the pumps. This is when the situation becomes real in the public mind. Not because it's worse, but because it's now seen. And visibility changes everything. Because once people can see a problem, they don't just react, they amplify it. This is the tipping point, the moment when individual decisions stop being independent and start becoming collective. People aren't just responding to the situation anymore, they're responding to each other. And that creates a feedback loop that accelerates the entire process. You see a line, so you assume there's a shortage. You join the line, which makes it longer. Someone else sees that, and now they assume it's even worse. Within hours, a manageable disruption becomes a full-scale demand surge. And this is why the 6-hour window is so critical. It's not about the duration of the event. It's about the speed of the reaction. The system doesn't give you time to evaluate slowly. It moves in phases, and once it enters the visible phase, your options shrink dramatically. But here's where it gets even more important. Not all fuel disruptions are equal. Now let's shift from understanding the system to navigating it. If you know that the critical window is the first 6 hours, the goal isn't to panic early, it's to act intelligently early. That means recognizing credible signals without overreacting to noise. Not every headline requires action. Not every rumor leads to disruption. The key is identifying events that directly impact supply chains, pipelines, refineries, transportation networks. These are the pressure points. When they're affected, the risk becomes real. But timing still matters. Act too early, and you might be responding to something that resolves quickly. Act too late, and you're competing with everyone else. The balance is in that narrow middle, where the signal is credible, but the reaction hasn't yet become widespread. This is where awareness becomes a skill. Because the people who consistently stay ahead of these situations aren't guessing. They're observing patterns. They understand how systems behave under stress, and they recognize the early signs before they become obvious. And once they act, they're done. That's another important point. Preparation in this context is simple. It's not about stockpiling fuel or filling multiple containers. It's about maintaining a baseline. Keeping your tank at least half full during normal times, so that when a disruption occurs, you're not starting from empty. Because if you are starting from empty, you're already in a vulnerable position. You don't have the luxury of timing. You have to act immediately, regardless of the situation. And that puts you directly into the surge. But if you have a buffer, even a small one, you gain flexibility. You can wait, observe, and choose your moment. That alone can make the difference between a 5-minute stop at a quiet station and a 2-hour wait in a line that's only getting longer. There's also a broader implication here, one that goes beyond fuel. Modern life is built on systems that are incredibly efficient, but not always resilient. They're optimized for normal conditions, not sudden spikes. And that means many of the things we rely on daily, fuel, food, transportation, can become unstable quickly if demand shifts unexpectedly. The 6-hour window isn't just about gas. It's a reflection of how fast modern systems can move from stable to strained. And that speed changes how you have to think. You can't rely on slow reactions anymore. You can't assume there will be time to prepare once a problem becomes obvious. Because by the time it's obvious, the system has already adjusted, and not in your favor. But at the same time, this isn't about fear. It's about positioning. Understanding where you stand in relation to the system, and how quickly that position can change. Recognizing that small, early actions, taken calmly and deliberately, can prevent much larger problems later. Because in the end, the difference between being stuck in a crisis and moving through it smoothly often comes down to a single factor: when you decided to act. Not after the lines formed, not after the pumps ran dry, but before any of that was visible. Within those first few hours, when everything still looked normal but wasn't. That's the window most people miss, and once it closes, you don't get it back.